Alright guys, welcome back. So let's continue our journey. Let's continue looking at the show Billions from the financial point of view. Let's continue looking at Billions and try to see if we can make sense of all the financial jargon and all the various financial machinations that happened in today's episode. So, Season 5, Episode 3, Subjugate and Conquer. Let's get started. So the show begins right where it left off last week. We've got Axe. He still wants to be a bank, and now it's become even more serious. It's clear that this is the direction that they want to go. We get the meeting with the Treasury Secretary. He comes in and he basically tells Axe, look man, kick rocks. You're not going to get this bank. You've got this criminal past. You've got this shady past. The various regulatory agencies will not give you the bank charter, and that's the key. They are looking for, Axe Capital is looking for a bank charter. Now, what exactly is that? Well, basically, that's the license that allows the bank to go out and take monies from individuals. That's simple. They've got to go to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, fancy name, Office of the Comptroller of Currency, and then once this charter is approved through that office, they push it over to the FDIC, that's the Federal Deposit Insurance Commission. They are the ones who guarantee the monies that are sitting in the various bank accounts. Right now, I think that number is roughly $250,000 per Social Security number. So if your bank goes kaput, the FDIC steps in and says, here, we make you whole. It takes a few weeks for the process to play out, but you do get your money back. Even during the major bank crisis of the 2007s and 8s, that crazy Great Recession, many banks went kaput. Many banks were merged, but individuals never really lost money, even the ones that went kaput, because the FDIC stepped in and it paid back. The interesting angle of the show, of course, is that we're not really interested in the minutiae of becoming a bank and going through all the regulatory issues. No. What the show wants to show us, of course, is the moral hazard that the other banks brought this nation down to in the 2007-8 crisis, and frankly, a little bit of what's happening even right now during this great corona pandemic. The argument here is that once you become so big, the government is not going to let you fail, the government's not going to shut you down, and you kind of have a license to do all the various naughty shenanigans that you wish to do. This is where Axe is headed towards. He wants this bank charter because he wants to be able to show the government how powerful Axe Capital actually can be. Now look, this is Showtime, this is Billions. We're not going to stick around looking at the minutiae of how to go and file your application and become a bank. What I want you to focus in on, what I think will kind of happen, of course I have no insights other than what's happening on the show, is that this thing called the Basel Accord. Now, what the Basel Accord is a set of frameworks. It's an agreement that essentially Western banking has agreed to. They meet every decade or so. They come up, the various bankers do. They come up with various agreements. They talk about how much money a bank is supposed to have on its balance sheet. They talk about how much risk a bank can expose itself to. They talk about how much protective monies the bank needs to have. And then the Federal Reserve itself chimes in and they themselves add some variables to the equation. So our global Western banks are operated under the framework of the Basel Accords. Now, the most interesting key point, which they'll talk about, I think, in the future, is something called Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 capital. These are the various requirements that these accords have agreed to, and within each one of these tiers is a certain framework that the bank has to adhere to. That basically means each one of these tiers has a set amount of cash that the bank needs to keep on its books. And of course, if a bank is not able to do that, the bank then poses a risk to the system because all the other banks are following the rules except for one particular bank or a set of banks. So I'm going to leave the tier 1 to 3 ratio discussion out of this particular instance. I'll post a link to it below and you may kind of explore it on your own. But essentially, it's the Basel Accord, the Office of the Comptroller, and the FDIC. These kind of big boys and gals are part of the equation, and this is where Axe Capital is going to have to bribe and kind of guile its way through to get this bank charter, and Axe is on his way. So essentially at the 12-minute mark, we're inside Axe Capital. We've got Taylor there. We're talking about something called a divestiture again. This is a term that keeps showing up over and over on this show. Last week we had the divestiture where that guy who wanted to be, I think, the commissioner of the FDA, he had to give up his shares and Axe wanted to buy them. Today we've got Taylor looking at this bank president. I think they're trying to make it sound like it's MIT. And essentially they're looking at this bank president, and the bank president says that, hey, we've got this huge endowment, this badass endowment, and now our students are protesting. Our students are saying, hey, take monies out of this endowment that are allocated towards fossil fuels and other unethical practices. And the bank president says to them again, kick rocks, kids, I'm going to do what I gotta do. So the play that's being set up here is that Billions wants to give us an insight into the world of these endowments that these large colleges have. We got that quick reference of Yale's endowment. That's $30 billion solid cash that these guys have. So when you look at these numbers, it kinda is jaw-dropping because these monies are just tremendous. Harvard, $41 billion. The University of Texas system, $31 billion. Yale sitting at $30 billion. Stanford, $27 billion. Princeton, $26 billion. And on. These billions add up to a lot of hundreds of billions. So the gist of the show is that these large colleges are actually very active participants in the financial markets. These guys and gals, of course, these guys and gals from these endowments, what are they supposed to do? Well, their job is to take this money, invest it, and then from that return on investment, various operations within the university are funded. That money may go into general liabilities, maybe just paying professors and people their salaries. It may go specifically geared towards, say, a research lab or a research institution. You know, there could be so many different places that these monies go to. But at the end of the day, one person, one group is actually managing this money. So what's happening here is we've got this large university. It has a lot of money in its endowment, and the students are now saying, hey man, we want you out of these friggin' fossil fuels. Well, what the point that Showtime is talking about is liquidity. Well, what's this liquidity thing about? Okay, so oftentimes these endowments, because they're so large and they invest for such a long period of time, they actually end up buying assets that are very illiquid. Let me give you a quick example. Timber. Hundreds and thousands of acres in Australia are owned by Yale and Harvard. Mining interests. University of Texas has a huge interest in the mining and oil system. So when you want to get rid of these investments, I mean, how many people out there are actively willing to buy 300,000 acres of land for timber? Not many. And now what happens if you know that the other side is willing to sell and in fact is looking to sell at an aggressive pace? Well, you're not going to offer them top dollar. In fact, you're not even going to offer them fair dollar. And this is the crunch of liquidity. If there aren't enough buyers and sellers in a system, pricing becomes very difficult. And oftentimes, if you've got to sell, you end up doing a fire sale because all the buyers go on strike. They say, you know what? Why should we pay you X amount of dollars? Because we know that you, Mr. Seller, are actually desperate, and therefore you're going to sell to us at a lower price than what the market price could be. And this is this liquidity constraint that they're talking about in Billions. This president of the university is not able to get out of all of his investments so quickly and so efficiently. Well, here comes Axe Capital. What they want to do in here is that Axe Capital is going to work as a buffer. Whatever the university wants to sell, Axe Capital will buy at fair market prices. Basically, the university presses a button and all of those shares and whatever these interests are get transferred to Axe Capital, and Axe Capital in turn transfers a bunch of cash to the university, and boom, you have a divestiture, and you didn't actually have to go sell this particular good, this particular commodity in the open markets. So this is the key point here, that Axe Capital through Taylor, Mase Capital, they want to act as a buffer, and they want this university to be able to divest from its holdings, and Axe Capital wants to facilitate that entire transaction. Now, looking at the rest of the show, there really wasn't much more meat to that matter. Today seemed to be more of a social and family-driven show. I love the way Wags played his role today. Brilliant. So we'll kind of leave it at that. Today we get to learn about endowments, the amount of monies that these endowments tend to hold. We learned about liquidity. We learned that these endowments tend to be in programs, they tend to be in investments that they can't quickly get out of. And when you can't quickly get out of an investment, you need a good counterparty to take on that risk with you so that both of you don't get effed. And guys and gals, that's basically the gist of today's show. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back again, season 5, episode 4. Hey, look at this. It builds one at a time. So with that, do that thing, like, subscribe thing, and all the other good things that come with this. I hope you're finding value in this, and I hope that you share this with other people. I'll talk to you next week. Cheers.